In the heart of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates once carved the cradle of civilization, the Sumerians rose to build humanity's first great cities. Yet hidden beneath their ancient temples and etched into their clay tablets lie 11 mysteries that defy explanation. How did they map the stars with impossible precision? Why do their records speak of gods descending from the sky? And how could a society over 5,000 years ago possess knowledge we still struggle to comprehend today? This is more than history. It is a journey into the unknown, where the origins of civilization blur into something far more enigmatic. They didn't ease into history. They exploded into it. Rising from the dust of ancient Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE, the Sumerians didn't build slowly like other early cultures. They appeared already armed with cities, temples, mathematics, law, irrigation systems, astronomy, and something no one else had yet dared to invent: writing. There were no long ages of gradual development, no clear transition from tribal life to urban sprawl. Instead, a full-blown civilization, as if someone flipped a switch in the cradle of humanity and jump-started time. But one haunting question still echoes through the ruins of Uruk and Eridu. Who were they? No origin myth, no ancestral homeland, no migration story, just an eerie silence. Unlike Egypt or China, whose civilizations grew like slow rivers over centuries, Sumer seemed to descend like a thunderclap, complete, self-contained, and alien. Could they have come from elsewhere? Or are we staring at the forgotten survivors of something even older? What do you think about the true origins of the Sumerians? Were they indigenous to Mesopotamia or descendants of a forgotten civilization? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might just be the one the world needs. Before the Sumerians, Mesopotamia was home to simple agricultural communities using stone tools and living in small villages. Yet, within just a few centuries, the region transformed into a highly urbanized society. There is no clear transitional phase between prehistoric settlers and the fully developed cities like Eridu or Uruk. There are no archaeological records showing gradual advances, no intermediate building techniques or evolving tool types. This development seems like a technological leap, rather than a linear evolution. Archaeologists have dubbed this the Sumer problem because the Sumerians do not appear to have evolved in place like the Egyptians or Chinese. Instead, they seemed to arrive with everything ready: writing, mythology, laws, mathematics, and even architectural artistry. One of the strangest aspects of Sumerian origins is their language known as Sumerian, which is unlike any other language ever discovered. It's what linguists call a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. It does not belong to Semitic like Akkadian or Babylonian, Indo-European, Turkic, or any other language family. No siblings, no ancestors, no cousins. This has left many linguists baffled. Most languages show some root structure, grammatical patterns, or borrowed vocabulary that hint at connections. Sumerian doesn't. It stands like a stray puzzle piece in the Mesopotamian desert, as if it originated from an alien culture altogether. Could it be that the Sumerians came from a very distant or deeply mysterious land unknown to the rest of the world? The Sumerians referred to themselves as Sagiga, meaning the black-headed people. In many ancient texts, they claimed to be the first people created by the gods, granted writing, law, and social order. However, what's truly strange is that they never recorded their own origins. There are no migration legends, no mention of an ancestral homeland, and no references to arriving from the north or crossing a desert. This complete silence has puzzled scholars. Was it pride or a memory deliberately erased? Some researchers suggest that the Sumerians were actually survivors of a global catastrophe, and that their civilization was a revival of long-lost knowledge, echoing the legends of Atlantis or a pre-flood world. In the face of the mystery surrounding the origins of the Sumerians, numerous theories have emerged within academic circles, from conventional explanations to those tinged with the mystical. One of the most widely accepted ideas is the Zagros hypothesis, which proposes that the Sumerians may have migrated from the Zagros Mountains in present-day Iran, bringing with them farming techniques, animal domestication, and rudimentary cultural elements, eventually settling in southern Mesopotamia. However, this theory fails to explain the sudden and advanced level of urban development and technology the Sumerians exhibited within just a few centuries. Another line of inquiry is the India hypothesis, based on some grammatical parallels between the Sumerian language and ancient Dravidian languages from the Indian subcontinent. Yet, mainstream linguists remain cautious, as the supporting evidence remains sparse and unconvincing. More boldly, some fringe researchers have proposed a radical theory that the Sumerians did not originate from any known region, but were descendants of a completely lost civilization, possibly Lemuria, or a sunken continent buried deep beneath the ocean. This idea stems from the unusual suddenness and completeness of the Sumerian civilization, a complex society with writing, laws, architecture, astronomy, and an origin date so early it defies conventional models of cultural evolution. However, none of these theories have surpassed the threshold of scientific proof, as they all lack consistent archaeological data, strong linguistic evidence, and most critically, genetic information. To this day, not a single Sumerian skeleton has been publicly and thoroughly analyzed for DNA, making it nearly impossible to determine any genetic connection between the Sumerians and modern populations. This represents a major gap in modern anthropological research and remains one of the key reasons why the origins of the first known civilization continue to elude us. When we examine the sophistication, independence, and abrupt emergence of Sumerian civilization, it's hard not to ask, was this really the first civilization, or simply the first we still remember? Writing is not merely a tool for communication. It marks the boundary between prehistory and history, between oral memory and the preservation of knowledge, and no one else but the Sumerians over 5,000 years ago created the world's first documented writing system, cuneiform. Yet when archaeologists discovered it, they were stunned not only by its age, but by something far stranger. It appeared as if, out of nowhere, no drafts, no intermediate sketches, no precursor system. So the question is, how could a tool requiring abstract thought, symbolic logic, and linguistic structure suddenly be invented almost fully formed in a land still in the early stages of urbanization? What do you think? Was Sumerian writing a spontaneous invention, humanity's first great linguistic breakthrough, or could it be a surviving trace of a deeper, more ancient stream of knowledge, long forgotten? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because the real answer may still be waiting to be uncovered. In most civilizations, writing tends to develop gradually. Simple pictograms, ideograms representing abstract concepts, syllabic scripts representing sounds, full writing systems with grammar and structure. But in Sumer, The oldest clay tablets dating to around 3200 BCE already display a system that is highly structured and phonetic. Not only were there symbols for objects, but also for actions, emotions, abstract ideas, tensed verbs, plural nouns, and even personal pronouns. There's no archaeological evidence of a half-finished system before it. It's like discovering a smartphone before the invention of electricity. Many people have assumed that early Sumerian cuneiform was merely a set of simple pictorial drawings, like a primitive guessing game of objects. But in reality, the opposite is true. From the very earliest clay tablets, Sumerian writing was already used to express deep abstract concepts such as justice, death, power, and divinity far beyond simple inventory tracking. The Sumerians knew how to combine symbols to create new meanings, encode spoken syllables into written signs, and use grammatical markers to distinguish word functions, such as past tense or passive voice. Clearly, this was no longer pictorial illustration, but an encoded system of thought, a level of expression requiring mature intellectual capacity, unlikely to have emerged solely from the need to count livestock or store grain. A widely accepted theory holds that writing was born out of administrative necessity tracking assets, taxes, and trade. Indeed, the earliest tablets often include entries such as how much grain was stored, who owed livestock to whom, barter exchanges between villages and temples. However, the issue lies in how fast it evolved. In under 300 years, Sumerian writing evolved from basic accounting marks to a tool for epic poetry, literature, mythology, law, and philosophy. There is no clear record showing a slow transformation from ledger sheets to the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was a leap, not a crawl. The language encoded in cuneiform was Sumerian, a linguistic isolate with no known relatives, which means they did not borrow it from neighboring cultures. They invented it from scratch. Its grammatical features include verb conjugation in 6 tenses, clear subject-verb-object sentence structure, use of suffixes to modify nuance and meaning, ability to express commands, hypotheticals, and negatives. There's no indication that this was a proto-language. On the contrary, it reflects a mature intellect and a deeply established linguistic tradition. If Sumerian writing was influenced by an older culture, then where is that culture? Egypt. Its hieroglyphs date to around 3100 BCE, no earlier. Indus Valley. Its script remains undeciphered and appeared later. China. Oracle bone script emerged over 1,000 years later. So, there is no predecessor writing system to inspire the Sumerians. That means the world's first writing had no parent. It was the firstborn of human cognition, which raises a deeper question. Why did it appear there and then? An increasingly discussed theory among alternative researchers is this: the Sumerians didn't invent writing, they resurrected it. That is, writing was not a product of a growing civilization, but a means of recovering lost knowledge from a forgotten, advanced age, perhaps linked to legends of Atlantis or pre-flood civilizations. Some indirect evidence includes ancient Sumerian texts with precise astronomical knowledge, star cycles, planetary motion, mythological engravings with highly complex societal structures, king lists with reigns spanning tens of thousands of years far beyond oral memory. This suggests that cuneiform may have been a medium, not the message, and the message, the knowledge, may have existed long before. Some researchers in the Ancient Advanced Civilization school argue there's no guarantee writing was entirely the product of the Sumerians themselves. Instead, they propose The Sumerians may have been guided by a group already in possession of higher knowledge, possibly survivors of cataclysmic events, or even beings of non-human intelligence. In Sumerian texts, there are accounts of the Anunnaki celestial beings who descended from the sky and gifted humans with lore and knowledge. Though framed as mythology, it raises a sobering question. Did someone seed the idea of writing, and the Sumerians were simply the first to grasp it? Writing, the miraculous tool of mind and memory, emerged in Sumer like a sudden flash. No slow evolution, no borrowing, no transitional system. Just a lightning strike of intellect in the Mesopotamian sands. And from that moment, human history was written. When looking at images or reconstructions of ziggurats, the giant tiered temples of the Sumerians, the first question that comes to mind isn't, "What is this?" but rather, how did they build this? Around 2100 BCE, while much of the world still lived in small tribal villages, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia constructed massive structures like the ziggurat of Ur, nearly 30 meters tall, with a foundation spanning thousands of square meters. These buildings were made from millions of handmade, kiln-fired bricks, arranged with astonishing architectural precision. And most puzzling of all, they did this without cement, without advanced wheels for transport, without iron tools or lifting machines. So the question remains, how did they accomplish this, and why build something so irrationally large for their time? What do you think about these ziggurats? Are they evidence of the Sumerians' extraordinary capabilities or remnants of a forgotten civilization lost to history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps your insight will help reconnect a missing link from the ancient past. A ziggurat is a type of religious architecture unique to ancient Mesopotamia, built in stacked levels that narrow toward the top, with a stairway leading to the summit. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which served as tombs, ziggurats were not burial sites, but dwellings for the gods. They were built not beneath the earth, but ascending toward the heavens, intended as a bridge between the human world and the divine realm. This lofty design required extremely advanced planning. Foundations had to support enormous weight. Bricks had to be fired strong enough to endure for centuries. Outer walls needed exact angles to resist erosion. The top structure had to withstand harsh weather without decaying. In short, these could not have been trial-and-error buildings. They demanded knowledge of physics, engineering, geology, and precise architectural calculations well beyond the expected capabilities of an early agrarian society. Ziggurats were made primarily from mud bricks, a common building material of the time, yet one that is weak and vulnerable if misused. To build multi-level structures, the Sumerians developed a method for firing bricks to permanence, mixing clay with straw, molding, drying, and kiln-firing them, resulting in bricks that lasted centuries. The issue is constructing a ziggurat like the one at Ur required millions of bricks, meaning an industrial-scale production operation sustained over many years. Yet to this day, no archaeological evidence has revealed brickworks of that magnitude. Even more puzzling, the Sumerians had no iron, no pulleys, no cranes, no advanced carts. So how did they lift tons of material upward, tier by tier, to heights of 20-30 meters? Some theorize they built temporary earth ramps, but this would require enormous labor forces and decades of effort. And it's doubtful whether urban populations at that time could have supplied such manpower. In short, we still don't know how they actually built them. Many assume ziggurats were just big piles of bricks, but deeper analysis reveals every ratio within a ziggurat was intentional. The slope of exterior walls typically ranged from 17 to 20 degrees, nearly identical across various sites. Height-to-width ratios and stair counts followed consistent patterns. Stairways often aligned with specific celestial orientations, typically east, or toward the rising of Sirius. This tells us the designers were not just masons, but architects with knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and abstract spatial reasoning. What's even more intriguing, none of this technical knowledge is preserved in any surviving text. No instruction manuals, no blueprints, only finished structures. Thus, a hypothesis arises: perhaps they learned the model from an external source or inherited it from a much earlier era. Ziggurats didn't grow food or increase population. So why would a developing society dedicate decades and hundreds of workers to erect massive brick mountains? According to ancient texts, ziggurats were dwelling places for gods visiting Earth. They weren't temples for prayer, but platforms for divine descent. The summit usually featured a small chamber, the god's residence, furnished with a bed, a table, offerings of food and water, and sometimes even a polished bronze mirror for the deity to view their reflection. Strangely, these rooms weren't meant for humans. There were no mass rituals or community gatherings. The items were arranged as if someone was truly going to arrive and stay. Which begs the question, who were these guests the ziggurats were built to welcome? Could ziggurats have been symbolic or literal landing platforms for otherworldly visitors? Some researchers in ancient advanced civilization theories believe so. Other great structures in history, like the pyramids of Giza, Teotihuacan's observatories, or the stone temples at Baalbek, are certainly monumental, but they were typically built during the peak of their respective civilizations, such as Egypt's New Kingdom or Imperial Rome. With vast labor and societal organization, ziggurats, however, were built too early, around 2100 BCE, long before Egypt's Golden Age, before the Minoans, and before ancient China. So how did a newly forming civilization construct projects of national scale, requiring interdisciplinary knowledge without any record of progressive technological development? Some scholars speculate the Sumerians didn't invent ziggurats themselves, but were replicating an architectural form seen by their ancestors in a former homeland. If the Sumerians, according to some fringe theories, were descendants of a forgotten prehistoric civilization like Atlantis or Mu, then ziggurats may not have been inventions, but rather reconstructions of a memory. In that light, the too advanced for their time nature of ziggurats might not be accidental, but rather a surviving trace of lost knowledge. Ziggurat Sumer's monumental towers were more than religious icons. They stand as challenges to modern understanding of ancient engineering, labor organization, and visionary architecture. Built from humble clay bricks, they've endured for thousands of years, with mathematical precision, celestial alignments, and grand scale that continue to astonish today's architects. They were not just creations of faith, but perhaps clues to a forgotten intelligence, or a purpose we've yet to fully comprehend. In the modern world, even though we live surrounded by binary code in computers or the familiar decimal system in education, there remains an ancient numerical outlier embedded in our daily lives, the base 60 counting system. 1 hour has 60 minutes. 1 minute has 60 seconds. A circle has 360 degrees divisible evenly by 60 and 6 measurements of time. Angles and ancient astronomy all trace back to the base 60 system of the Sumerians. But the big question is, why did they choose the number 60? And why has it survived for millennia, influencing even modern civilization? What do you think about this? Was the number 60 an independent invention of the Sumerians or a lingering trace of some forgotten ancient knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments, because perhaps the real answer doesn't lie in the past, but is still waiting to be recognized in the present. While most ancient civilizations used the decimal system base 10, likely due to humans having 10 fingers, the Sumerians chose a different path. They adopted a sexagesimal base 60 system. In this system, after 59 comes the next tier's 1, like how 9 becomes 10 in base 10. They had unique symbols for 1 and 10, repeated in combinations to count up to 60. It was used for everything time: angles, astronomy, math, commerce, and geography. This wasn't a supplementary system, it was the core structure of the Sumerians' entire mathematical worldview. And strangely, no one knows why. From a modern perspective, the number 60 has astonishing properties. It is even and divisible by many small integers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 15, 20, 30. It has 12 positive divisors ideal for dividing time and space. It is the least common multiple of 5 and 6, allowing the finger-counting system, base 10, to merge with the 12 knuckles on one hand. This leads many modern mathematicians to admit 60 is incredibly practical for measurement, division, and scheduling. But this raises the deeper question: how could the Sumerians have known that? There's no evidence that they analyzed the number's mathematical traits in a modern way. So did they intuit its perfection? Or did they inherit it from a more ancient system of knowledge? One of the most remarkable discoveries about the Sumerians is that they solved complex math problems using number tables based on base 60. Multiplication tables in base 60 extending into the tens of thousands. Reciprocal tables, square roots, cube roots handwritten with 6-digit precision, area, volume, and division tables applied in architecture, agriculture, and astronomy. In other words, they didn't adopt base 60 for fun. They built an entire system of reasoning and application around it. This has led many historians to question their mathematical thinking far surpassed that of contemporary societies. But where did it originate? There's no archaeological evidence showing that base 60 evolved gradually from a simpler system. On the contrary, the oldest clay tablets found in Uruk and Nippur already show a complete, standardized, symbol-rich base 60 system. This leads to two possibilities. The Sumerians were mathematical geniuses inventing, testing, applying, and spreading the system in a short time. They didn't invent it, but inherited it from an earlier, forgotten knowledge source. The second theory is supported by many alternative researchers. They propose that this numerical system is a remnant of a long-lost advanced civilization, and that the Sumerians were simply users of tools whose origins they might not have fully understood. A deeper reason the Sumerians may have chosen 60 lies in astronomy. There is significant evidence they observed and measured time based on celestial motion. A solar year has 360 days, divisible as 6 times 60 averages 360 degrees. A traditional hour was 112 of the sun's cycle. 1 hour chews 60 minutes. The cycle of 12 hours day-night, 12 months fits seamlessly with 60. Thus, 60 wasn't just a calculating tool, it was the heartbeat of the cosmos in Sumerian thought. They may have chosen it because it mirrored the eternal laws of the sky. Beyond math, the number 60 appeared in all aspects of Sumerian life. Supreme God Anu had the divine number 60. The largest temple in Nippur dedicated to Enlil had 60 steps. In the Anunnaki pantheon, the most powerful group of gods totaled exactly 60. This led some scholars to believe 60 wasn't just a mathematical tool, it was a sacred code. In a civilization where gods played a role in every aspect of life, choosing 60 may have reflected the belief that it was the number of the gods. Strangely, while most ancient systems of measurement have disappeared, base 60 has survived. Modern clocks are still based entirely on 60 minutes and seconds. Geography, navigation, and surveying still divide angles into 360 degrees. Ancient astronomy and astrology still rely on the sexagesimal framework. This shows that even though few remember why, the system is simply too efficient to discard. And it raises the question again. Did the Sumerians know something that we've forgotten? The Sumerian obsession with 60 wasn't random. It was a deep intellectual framework applied across their entire civilization. From math to astronomy, from religion to trade, from temples to tablets, 60 appears not just as a number, but as a core code, a key of intelligence whose origin remains unknown to us even today. Among the many legacies left by the Sumerian civilization, astronomy remains one of the most controversial. Despite living in an era without telescopes, modern physics, or knowledge of gravity and elliptical orbits, the Sumerians left behind astonishing astronomical records. They tracked the moon, the sun, constellations, and, most notably, the planets. What has shocked many researchers is that some ancient texts appear to suggest that the Sumerians knew more than the 5 planets visible to the naked eye, possibly even listing all 9 or 10 planets in the solar system, including some only discovered with modern science. Could that be true? Or are these simply misinterpretations of ancient symbols? Let's examine the full body of evidence to answer the question. Did the Sumerians really know all the planets in the solar system thousands of years before telescopes even existed? What do you think about the Sumerians' astronomical knowledge? Were they simply skilled observers or inheritors of a scientific legacy long forgotten by history? Share your perspective in the comments. Your insight might be the key to unlocking this ancient mystery. First, we must acknowledge that only 5 planets are visible to the naked eye. Under ideal conditions, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. These planets shine brighter than the stars and move along their own paths in the sky, so ancient observers could distinguish them without the aid of telescopes. The Sumerians, along with successor civilizations like Babylon and Assyria, not only recognized these planets, but also recorded their positions, motion speeds, retrograde cycles, and integrated them into astrology, religion, and calendar systems. However, the real controversy lies beyond these 5 planets. Some alternative researchers point to ancient Sumerian texts and images that appear to show diagrams with 11 or 12 celestial bodies orbiting a central object. Planetary names that don't exactly match the 5 known visible planets. Clay tablets depicting strange celestial bodies with long or disappearing orbits. One of the most cited examples is the astronomical tablet VA243, housed at the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin. It appears to depict a central star surrounded by 11 orbiting bodies, which some proponents of ancient astronaut theories interpret as evidence the Sumerians knew of a 12-planet solar system, including the Moon and a 12th planet Nibiru. However, mainstream scholars reject this interpretation, arguing that many symbols on the tablet should not be understood as astronomical in the modern sense. and that VA-243 contains no accompanying text describing the planets clearly. So what's the truth? There's no denying that the Sumerians had a sophisticated method of tracking celestial objects. Mul, a symbol denoting stars or bright celestial bodies. Enlil, Anu, and Eozone's divisions of the sky for tracking movement. Detailed tracking of Venus's cycle with astonishing precision, later preserved and expanded in the Babylonian Venus tablet of Amisaduqa. Notably, in their astronomical records, the Sumerians sometimes listed 7 moving celestial bodies: the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets. However, in some ritual and astrological texts, they alluded to 11 or 12 celestial gods, personified as deities, leading many to believe this represented a full model of the solar system. But it's possible this was a blend of religious myth and observational astronomy, not a literal list of planets as we define them today. This is where the debate intensifies. Uranus was officially discovered in 1781 with a telescope, Neptune in 1846, by calculating irregularities in Uranus's orbit, Pluto in 1930. After centuries of searching, all of them are invisible to the naked eye, even Uranus, although brighter than some stars, only appears as a faint dot and cannot be identified as a planet without prolonged observation. So how could the Sumerians have known about them? By noticing irregular movements in other planets, this would require advanced, long-term observational accuracy through theoretical predictions or astronomical models. No evidence of such sophisticated math exists in their texts via mythological or oral traditions, difficult to verify, but often cited by proponents of the Anunnaki hypothesis. To this day, no Sumerian text has ever listed Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto by name or described their specific features. Any such connections are purely speculative and retrofitted with modern understanding. The well-known theory proposed by Zecharia Sitchin in The 12th Planet argues that the Sumerians were aware of a planet named Nibiru, with a highly elliptical orbit returning every few thousand years, and home to the Anunnaki beings said to have engineered humanity. Sitchin based this theory on texts like the Enuma Elish and certain astronomical symbols. According to him, Nibiru was the 12th body counting the sun, moon, and 9 planets. However, mainstream Assyriologists argue that Nibiru was likely just another name for Jupiter, Venus, or a specific celestial crossing point. There is no text in the original Sumerian records that describes a distant planet with an elliptical orbit or a 600-year cycle. Therefore, Nibiru remains a speculative hypothesis with no concrete archaeological basis. Even if the Sumerians didn't know all the planets, it's impossible to deny they had extraordinary observational abilities for their time. Recorded complex motion cycles, retrograde movement, and used them to align calendars, influenced Babylonian, Greek, and Chinese astronomy centuries later. So perhaps the real question isn't how many planets did they know, but rather how much did they truly understand, and how, to date, there is no solid evidence that the Sumerians knew of Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. But we also can't entirely dismiss the possibility that they detected unusual celestial phenomena through means we still don't fully grasp, whether through long-term pattern recognition, advanced calendars, or encoded myths. What we do know is this: the Sumerians were not simple farmers gazing idly at the stars. They were diligent skywatchers who built an entire worldview around the cosmos, and parts of that worldview remain mysterious even today. Among the most controversial topics from Sumerian civilization, the story of the Anunnaki the supreme beings who came from the sky, always tops the list. Not only were they central to Sumerian beliefs, but also because of one particular detail in ancient texts. The Anunnaki were said to have created humankind. But what does created really mean here? Religious myth? Metaphor? Or something more literal, biological intervention? Some non-mainstream scholars, most notably writer Zecharia Sitchin, argue that the Sumerians recorded a story in which humans were genetically engineered by the Anunnaki to serve as a labor force for resource extraction. This bold hypothesis is strongly rejected by traditional academia, but continues to fascinate millions. So, where does the truth lie? What do you think? Are humans simply the product of natural evolution or a life form purposefully engineered in ancient times? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the right question can unlock humanity's greatest answers. In Sumerian culture, the Anunnaki referred to a group of high-ranking deities, descendants of the sky god Anu. They were often described as living in the heavens, Dingir, but could descend to earth and dwell in ziggurats, governing nature, warfare, laws, and even the fate of humankind. Notable figures include Anu, king of the heavens; Enlil, lord of wind and order; Enki, god of wisdom, fresh water, and creation; Ninhursag, goddess of the earth and fertility. Remarkably, Enki and Ninhursag were often associated with the creation of humans not through divine magic, but through direct manipulation of flesh and blood. One of the most notable ancient texts is the Atrahasis, the Babylonian version of a Sumerian myth, which tells us that, initially, the Anunnaki gods were forced to labor excavating land and digging irrigation canals. Exhausted, they rebelled against their toil. Enki proposed the creation of a worker race. They sacrificed a god named Geshtu-e, mixing his blood with clay to create humankind. A line in the text clearly states, "I will create Lulu, he shall bear the toil of the gods. Blood shall be mixed with clay, and flesh will be molded." This story may sound religious in nature, but it includes compelling elements. Mixing blood and clay resembles the idea of genetic splicing. Choosing the god of wisdom as the DNA donor implies deliberate planning. Humans were created specifically to work as a functional species. This foundation is what later gave rise to theories of ancient genetic engineering. In his book, The 12th Planet, Sitchin proposed that the Anunnaki were not gods, but an extraterrestrial race from a planet called Nibiru. They arrived on Earth around 450 years ago to mine gold in southern Africa. To avoid physical labor, they genetically engineered humans, combining their own DNA with Homo erectus. Early humans were labor slaves. Later, more intelligent variants emerged. Sitchin cited Sumerian texts and carvings, suggesting that symbols like the Tree of Life, twisted cords, or biological tools were evidence of this intervention. But mainstream scholars firmly disagree. No Sumerian text explicitly calls the Anunnaki beings from another planet. Nibiru is not clearly described as a physical planet. All DNA and gene editing interpretations are modern overlays on ancient metaphors. Still, Sitchin's theory remains popular, as it offers a comprehensive explanation for many ancient enigmas. Some Sumerian carvings, especially those depicting Enki and Ninhursag, show figures standing near objects resembling test tubes, spirals of DNA, or medical instruments. Scenes where a human is lying on a table, surrounded by gods performing procedures. Symbols that resemble cells or gene splices, when viewed through a modern lens. However, such interpretations are entirely dependent on modern visual associations, and there's no direct textual confirmation of biotechnology. What is clear? The Sumerians described the creation of humans as a structured act involving materials and techniques, carried out by divine craftsmen. Unlike later religions, which portray humans as born from love or divine purpose, Sumerian belief holds that humans were made simply to relieve the gods of their labor. Humans were not the center of the cosmos. They were tools created to work. Once their purpose was fulfilled, humans were neglected, leading to the Great Flood. This perspective aligns with the idea of a technologized creation, a utilitarian product made to perform a function. When it's no longer needed, it can be discarded. This unsettling notion of dehumanization is a core argument for those who support the Anunnaki hypothesis. The Sumerians may have created myths to explain the world, but why include such specific elements like the use of blood, clay, and shaping techniques, clear descriptions of materials, purposes, and creators, assigning distinct biological functions to certain deities Enki with genetics, Ninhursag with the womb? These details lead many alternative researchers to believe the Sumerians were not inventing stories, they were recording something they had heard, witnessed, or passed down. If that's the case, then perhaps the myth of the Anunnaki is a faded memory of a lost era of high technology, preserved only as legend. To date, no scientific evidence supports the idea that humans were engineered by the Anunnaki. No DNA traces, no archaeological biotechnology, no ancient labs, but it's also hard to ignore that the Sumerians described the creation of humans in striking detail. They didn't portray it as divine magic, but as a deliberate process by divine craftsmen. This story doesn't appear universally across cultures, but is specific to Sumer, later spreading to Babylonian, Akkadian, and Assyrian mythologies. So even if we cannot yet prove it, we also cannot easily dismiss the possibility that the Sumerians may have recorded or inherited accounts of a technologically sophisticated intervention in the origins of mankind. No story is more famous or emotionally powerful than the tale of the Great Flood, both in Sumerian culture and biblical tradition, often referred to as the beginning of historical memory. This story appears in multiple versions, such as the Eridu Genesis, Atrahasis, and Tablet X of the Epic of Gilgamesh. What do you think? Was the Great Flood a collective memory of a local prehistoric catastrophe? Or does the story hint at a much larger event for which we've yet to find evidence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The full picture may lie in asking the right question. Ziusudra, as mentioned in the Sumerian king list, and Eridu Genesis, was the ruler of Shuruppak. Forewarned in a dream by the god Enki about an impending flood meant to destroy humanity, he was instructed to build a massive boat to save his family, animals, and artisans after 7 days and nights of storms. The vessel came to rest, and Ziusudra was granted eternal breath and taken to the sacred land of Dilmun. Excavations at Shuruppak Tel Farah, Uruk, and Kish uncovered an unusually thick layer of silt, sandwiched between two human occupation layers and dated to around 2900 BCE. This time frame aligns with the end of the Jemdet Nasa period and the beginning of the early dynastic the Filwa era, a time of major upheaval in Sumerian history. Archaeologist Leonard Woolley, during his work at described a layer of mud over 2 meters thick with no signs of human settlement, which he interpreted as clear evidence of a catastrophic flood, powerful enough to wipe out the existing culture. This discovery raised a compelling question: could the Great Flood myth be a collective memory of a real historical disaster? One of the most striking aspects of studying the Great Flood legend is the astonishing similarity between the Sumerian Ziusudra, Babylonian Atrahasis, and Epic of Gilgamesh versions. All of them tell of gods who suddenly decide to wipe out humanity. A chosen individual who is warned in a dream or by a deity, and the construction of a large boat to save his family and animals. The rain lasts for 7 days. The vessel drifts before coming to rest on high ground, and the survivor offers sacrifices in gratitude. These recurring details are unlikely to be coincidental. They point to the existence of a shared flood motif in Mesopotamian culture, one that was likely passed down and adapted across civilizations, most notably in the biblical story of Noah. Could this be a legacy of collective memory rooted in an actual historical catastrophe? Many researchers believe that the Great Flood legends actually stem from real, recurring floods in the Tigris-Euphrates River basin. Each spring, melting snow from the northern mountains would cause sudden rises in water levels, triggering devastating floods, especially in low-lying areas like Shuruppak and Uruk. Over generations, these events were remembered and passed down as collective memory, eventually evolving into mythological stories where humans not only struggled against nature, but also faced the judgment of the gods. Some fringe theories suggest that a great flood once submerged the entire Earth, but archaeological evidence paints a different picture. The layers of silt found at Shuruppak, and Kish appear to be localized. Confined to the Mesopotamian region, there is no geological trace, such as a global sediment layer, to confirm that a worldwide flood occurred around 2900 BCE. This suggests that if a flood did happen, it was most likely a regional catastrophe, not a global event. Texts like the Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh were written down around the late 3rd to early 2nd millennium BCE, yet their content describes a mythical age in which kings such as Ziusudra or Ubaratutu were said to have reigned for tens of thousands of years. Fantastic elements, like humans being molded from clay to serve the gods, a rebellion of lesser deities, or a great flood as divine punishment for all humanity, carry deep metaphorical and symbolic meaning. These stories were not meant to describe actual weather events, but rather to reflect the religious worldview and profound beliefs of the Sumerians about humanity's role in the cosmic order. So, was the Sumerian Great Flood legend a historical event, or just a myth? Most modern scholars believe the story reflects a collective memory of severe floods that occurred in southern Mesopotamia around 2900 BCE, a theory supported by geological layers and archaeological data. However, there is no credible evidence of a global or supernatural flood as described in ancient texts. The surviving stories, though, wrapped in mythological elements, still carry traces of real geological events and collective trauma, rather than being pure inventions of imagination. When studying ancient Sumerian texts such as the Eridu Genesis, Atrahasis, Enuma Elish, or the Epic of Gilgamesh, one cannot help but be astonished by the striking parallels with stories in the Old Testament: the global flood, the tempting serpent, the Garden of Eden, artificial genetic networks, and divine destruction caused by greed or injustice. Why do such coincidences exist? Did the Jewish people borrow from Mesopotamian mythology, or do both traditions stem from a forgotten common source? After King Nebuchadnezzar II conquered Jerusalem in 586 BCE, thousands of Jews were exiled to Babylon for nearly 70 years. During their time immersed in the vibrant civilization of Mesopotamia, they were deeply exposed to its religion, literature, and philosophical thought, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Great Flood myth, and a pantheon of gods such as Enki and Enlil. It is no coincidence that these stories gradually became transformed, adapted, and reinterpreted through the emerging monotheistic lens of Judaism. This was not merely a case of borrowing, but the result of a profound process of cultural assimilation and transformation. When comparing ancient Sumerian texts like Eridu Genesis, Atrahasis, or the Epic of Gilgamesh with the Old Testament, one can easily spot astonishing similarities. In the Great Flood myth, both Ziusudra from Sumerian lore and Noah from the Bible are warned by a divine being in a dream. Build a massive ark, save humanity and animals, endure 7 days of rain, land on a mountain, and finally offer a sacrifice. In the story of human creation, Enki, the god of wisdom, fashions humans from clay and divine blood. While the Bible depicts God creating Adam from dust and breathing life into his nostrils, fundamental moral concepts also appear in both Adam and Eve are cast out of Eden for breaking divine law. Just as in Gilgamesh, the god Ea warns Utnapishtim to keep the secret of immortality hidden. Even many Sumerian gods like Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag seem to echo in the Bible through angelic or divine titles, suggesting a deep current of cultural memory connecting the two belief systems. Mesopotamian texts shaped the religious foundations of the ancient Middle East. When the Jewish people compiled the Hebrew Bible between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, they inherited this tradition. This leads many scholars to conclude that the Bible is a theological descendant of Mesopotamian mythology, reinterpreted through a monotheistic lens. Despite the astonishing similarities, Sumerian mythology and the Bible reveal fundamental and profound differences. First, the Sumerian belief system is polytheistic, featuring dozens of gods representing natural and social forces, often conflicting, jealous, and driven more by power than morality. In contrast, the Old Testament centers on a single, sovereign God, all-powerful and absolute in ethical authority. In Sumerian myths, humans were created primarily to serve the god's needs, to labor, offer sacrifices, and act as servants. But in the Bible, humanity is portrayed as a noble creation, made in the image of God, possessing inherent dignity and spiritual worth. Lastly, Sumerian myths are set in vague, timeless eras with largely mythical characters. While the Bible is closely tied to a defined historical timeline, anchored by real figures like Abraham and Moses, and aligned with identifiable events in the history of the ancient Near East. Some alternative scholars suggest that both the Sumerian and Hebrew civilizations may have originated from a much older and long-forgotten culture. According to this theory, stories like the Great Flood, the creation of humanity, or eternal life are actually fragments of a collective memory, passed down orally through countless generations and gradually altered by language, geography, and belief systems. In this view, the similarities between the two religious frameworks are not mere imitation, but rather traces of a shared cultural origin buried by the tides of history. A key factor that complicates the comparison between Sumerian mythology and the Bible is the fragmented and incomplete state of the original texts. Much of what we know comes from later copies written in Akkadian or Babylonian, while the original Sumerian versions are often lost or exist only in scattered fragments. Over generations of transcription and translation, the content may have been altered, expanded, or reinterpreted, meaning that the Sumerian and biblical versions are not necessarily copies of one another, but rather two parallel streams of tradition stemming from a shared ancient origin. Most modern scholars believe that the Hebrews did not simply copy Sumerian mythology, but rather absorbed and transformed its symbols, motifs, and central themes, integrating them into their own belief system. Stories like the Great Flood or Adam and Eve were reinterpreted through a monotheistic lens, emphasizing moral responsibility and the sacred purpose of humanity. This represents a process of cultural assimilation and reinterpretation, not mechanical borrowing. The similarities between Sumerian mythology and the Bible are not mere coincidence, but rather traces of a memory journey spanning thousands of years from Mesopotamia to Babylon, and eventually to Jerusalem. Though restructured and reshaped in language and meaning by each culture, these stories still preserve a shared core about human origins, destiny, and our connection to the divine. The lingering question is, are we reading echoes of an ancient truth, or just distant reverberations blurred by the passage of history? With a lifespan of nearly 3,000 years, the Sumerian civilization was once the cradle of writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, and urbanization. Yet, by the late 3rd millennium and early 2nd millennium BCE, Sumer began to decline drastically, and by around 1750 BCE, it had nearly vanished. What caused such a radiant civilization to disappear in just a single generation? What do you think about the disappearance of Sumer? Is it truly possible for a brilliant civilization to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only written memories? Share your perspective, because history may not have told us the whole story. Around 2200 BCE, the Mesopotamian region, the heart of the Sumerian civilization, began experiencing a prolonged drought cycle known as the 4.2 kilo-year event. This was one of the most severe climate changes during the Holocene, triggering widespread aridity across West Asia, North Africa, and South Asia. In Sumer, a sharp decline in rainfall disrupted their river-based irrigation systems, causing agricultural output to collapse. The economy, heavily reliant on crop cultivation and wet farming, rapidly declined. Severe soil salinization led to repeated crop failures, widespread famine, rising unemployment, and the start of mass migration. Within a few centuries, the population of Sumer dropped by nearly 60%, leading to the collapse of its city-states. This was not just a climate crisis, it was a devastating blow to the very foundation of a civilization's survival. Aside from climate change, another major factor contributing to the collapse of Sumer was political conflict and constant warfare among the city-states. From very early on, cities like Ummah, Lagash, and Adab were engaged in continuous battles over control of resources and farmland, especially the irrigation canals. These wars not only caused massive loss of life, but also severely weakened the economy and social structures. During the Akkadian Empire, King Rimush launched brutal military campaigns to suppress rebellious cities, resulting in tens of thousands of deaths or people being taken as slaves. In the final era, under the Ur III dynasty, King Ibisin was unable to defend the territory against invasions from the Elamites and Amorites. Around 2004 BCE, the city of Ur fell, marking the end of Sumer's independence. The prolonged conflicts exhausted the population, collapsed administrative systems, and opened the door for foreign powers to invade with ease. One of the most critical ecological factors contributing to the fall of Sumer was the Euphrates River changing its course. which led to the collapse of the entire irrigation canal system. According to records from the reign of King Samsu-iluna of the Babylonian dynasty, the river shifted its path by hundreds of kilometers from its original course, leaving behind once vital irrigation channels that had served as the lifeline of Sumerian agriculture. Without a stable water supply, the land became arid, crops withered, and residents were forced to abandon once thriving cities. Sustaining an agricultural way of life, the very foundation of Sumerian society, became impossible. Within a few generations, many areas that were once centers of culture and politics turned into desolate marshlands, later known as the Sealand. However, Sealand never achieved the urban scale or significance of its predecessors. The loss of the river wasn't merely the loss of water, it was the loss of the very lifeblood of an entire civilization. One of the clearest endpoints of the Sumerian civilization was the political fragmentation and collapse of its social structure. As the population declined drastically due to famine, drought, and warfare, smaller city-states like Uruk, Lagash, Kish, and gradually lost their power and independence. In this power vacuum, Semitic peoples, especially the Amorites from the northwest, rose to prominence, occupying territories and founding new dynasties such as Isin and Larsa. This transitional period culminated in the rise of Hammurabi in Babylon in 1792 BCE, who unified most of southern Mesopotamia. By around 1750 BCE, the Elamites from the east invaded and completely conquered the city of marking the end of Sumer as an independent civilization. From that point on, the Sumerian language was only used in temples and scholarly texts, no longer spoken in daily life. A civilization that once helped shape the course of human history was swept into the shadows by the empires that followed. As Joseph Tainter proposed, the collapse of complex societies often stems from systems becoming too complicated to sustain. Excessive stratification, bureaucracy, and specialization make such systems fragile. When simultaneously struck by ecological crises, warfare, and mass displacement, the Sumerian structure collapsed irreversibly. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the disappearance of Sumer comes from modern archaeological excavations at once glorious cities like Uruk, Shuruppak, and Lagash. Layers of abandoned cultural strata stretching across centuries indicate no signs of reconstruction or continued urban development after around 1739 to 1720 BCE. At the same time, texts and carvings hallmarks of Sumerian civilization also abruptly cease during this period. This suggests that the collapse was not the result of a sudden invasion, but rather the culmination of many factors: prolonged harsh climate, shifts in the Euphrates River, breakdown of social structure, and chronic political instability. What remains is not the trace of war, but the silence of a civilization quietly withdrawing from history. Sumer wasn't wiped out by alien catastrophe. It faded gradually by human and natural forces. Long-term droughts desiccated the soil. Internal wars and invasions destroyed city-states. Irrigation froze as rivers diverted. Civilization exhausted itself. Its people migrated, and its territory was erased. Yet the Sumerian writing, culture, and knowledge survived, forming the backbone of Mesopotamian civilization. Passed on through Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, and ultimately to us through cuneiform inscriptions,